Well, good morning, everybody. I have a special guest this morning, Katherine Kowalchuk, who happens to be a lawyer for truth, works with the Council of Alberta Lawyers, is definitely a very strong freedom advocate, and as she commented in our little preamble here, a general shit disturber. So I'm in good company, obviously, because I kind of rank myself in that latter category. In particular, the general shit disturber and strong freedom advocate. Unfortunately, today, so many people happen to be viewed as problems or, disturbing the peace or the narrative. But it's so necessary. And one of the things we're going to talk about today with Katherine from a legal perspective is what's going on with this worldview and the infiltration of these Marxist ideologies that are coming in through United Nations and that are trickled right down through all our academia. You're seeing challenges that are happening more and more at the institutional level, the academic level, the judiciary. And I think Katherine really brings a very unique perspective to the problems and has a very broad understanding of what some of the issues are and how maybe we can correct that. So welcome so much, Katherine, to the show.
Thank you, Nadine, for having me. It's been quite a journey that we've been on, and I'm really happy to have somebody like yourself in my company of being a shit disturber.
Well, we've been friends now, and I would say friends now for a little while. We've gotten to know each other over the last number of years, especially around COVID, and have lots of mutual friends and keep mutual company. And yeah, when we started talking, this is the problem. You and I talk, in any conversation we talk, it's like, oh my God, we should have recorded that.
Yeah.
Even our getting ready for this, I'm like, wait a minute, this needs to be on video. So Katherine, when we decided to do this one in particular this morning, there was a couple of issues that were really at the forefront for you. And a lot of it had to do around the United Nations, the Pact for the Future Digital Compact and Declaration on Future Generations. I'm going to let you kind of just kick off the morning here as to what it is you want to discuss. And then I think we'll dive in a little bit with some questions and maybe some applicability to Alberta and other nations, and how, like, even things like C-293, for example, which is coming out of a lot of stuff like this, good ideas and things that sound good in intent, but really have very harmful and malicious outcomes. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, Nadine. I think where my focus has been for a long time now has been bigger in scope. In politics, I think people have a tendency, and understandably so, to focus on local issues, right? Of course, healthcare, education, taxes, and those things. But I think where there's been a big disconnect between the advocates, the freedom advocates, and government and the rest of the population has been in understanding the rules under which we are being governed and working with. And when you look at the genesis of the United Nations, it was created after World War II, ostensibly to prevent a third world war. That's why it was created. Since then, it has morphed using Marxist principles into what it is today, where its goals are really to promote and implement a one world government, a one world religion, and a one world economy. And we don't talk about any of this really as in society at large. These policies through the United Nations have trickled in through every level of government and every institution, including our professional governing bodies and our academic institutions and education system. and have been in the works for decades. I can remember being, I was born in 1975, in the 80s and 90s when they were talking about sustainable development. And I remember thinking at that time, not understanding anything and being very young, what the hell does that mean? Sustainable development, right? And so when you look at the definitions of the Oxford definition of sustainable development, it talks about economic development without depletion of natural resources. And then when you look at the UN's definition of sustainable development, they talk about how we must live today by meeting needs without compromising the chances of future generations, right? So it all sounds good, right? It all sounds like it's going to be targeted and really mindful of future generations. And of course, we all want our children and our grandchildren to have a wonderful life and the life that we had growing up. The three pillars of sustainable development include economic growth, social inclusion, environmental protection. And the UN also talks a lot about a care economy. And I don't know if you've heard about a care economy, but really the care economy or moral economy talks about prioritizing the care of one another, and the environment in which we live. Okay, that sounds good, doesn't it? But I think where we are losing sight is, where did these ideas come from? So the idea of a moral or care economy was actually invented by activist E.P. Thompson, and he was in 1971, and he was a Marxist social historian. When you look at the feminist movement, the genesis of the feminist movement is born out of Marxist ideology, right? And so all of these initiatives have been percolating under the surface and insidiously creeping into our governments and our academia and our institutions with the cooperation of big corporations, the tech industry, etc., to come together to promote this one world government, one world economy, one world religion, right? And so
let's just interject there for a second, because I think that's really important to highlight, is that so many people believe still that this is conspiracy theory, that there is nobody working behind the scenes to create a one world anything, and that, how can a handful or a group of small individuals actually accomplish this? But I think what I'd like to do before we get into the depth of the conversation is that when you consider today that even our corporations, we have corporations today, for example, like on the media side, there's only six major corporations that control the entire world's narrative. Right? And I think this is going to go with your worldview. And so to believe that this is a conspiracy theory is, I think, an ignorant statement. And this is how they win and control the narrative, though, because it's about oppressing the dissent, right? And making sure that the people who are speaking up to inform people about these types of things are discredited. And so I think, here we have a lawyer, very well educated, and you're very articulate, not to mention very beautiful, but here's somebody who's well informed, well educated. People say, well, because I love this statement. What ends up happening with government is, for whatever reason, you're not elected the day before, and you're just like everybody else, right? Then all of a sudden they get elected, and somehow people's view of government changes. They somehow think that, well, now more.
And the person changes, and of the person changes, right?
And
all of a sudden they have all this power.
Yeah, and really you were the same person as you were the day before. So what has changed? Like, you don't have any more information, any more knowledge or that than you did literally the day before, but for some reason everything changes. And the problem I have with this United Nations is it's not elected, right? It is a group of individuals that have come together that have really I call it the world's largest wealth redistribution program, because it steals the wealth of nations and redistributes it to primarily, I'd say, developing nations like African nations. And, when you read through the UN declarations and these sustainable goals, they all sound very great, but the cost comes at the back of, I would call, the free world. And, they talk about, destroying poverty, destroying, eliminating terrorism, all these things. But these are the nations. There's 193 nations, of which only a small handful are free, right? And you're going to talk about this because it is truly that worldview, that moral standard from which we view the world, that directs and has given, I think, the free world the prosperity and the freedoms that it has, vice their old world view of, communism, Marxism, or dictatorship, totalitarianism, that has kept them suppressed and where they're at. So, what do you say to the people who, want to just discredit this right from the get-go? Oh, this is just conspiracy.
Well, I actually ignore those people, recognizing, however, that we have to spend time educating them if they have eyes to see and ears to hear, right? And continuing with the message and continuing to inform to the best of our ability, and disseminate this information, because it is very important. And the whole idea, like the conspiracy theory meme became famous after the assassination of JFK, and is actually a CIA created terminology designed to discredit people who are critical thinkers and are able to connect the dots. And I mean, I've done a lot of reading from various different sources about, from a psychological perspective, how we are a left brain society, and how the information that we are receiving and how we're steered to receive it from a left brain mentality, really at the elimination of right brain, which is creative, etc. We're not able to connect the dots as a society, by and large, or many people aren't, because they're able to see the dots, but they're not able to connect the dots. And there's a bunch of psychology around that, but it helped me in understanding, okay, why is it that some people can see what we can see, especially this became very evident during COVID, but other people are not able to see it, right? And that's just one aspect that might explain it. Dr. Matthias Desmond also talks about, the psychology around mass formation and stressors and how they impact how people see things. And make no mistake, this has all been done by design, right? So the United Nations has been at this in various forms, infiltrating government. We know that if you listen to the videos, if you read the books of Klaus Schwab, it's very, who's the head of the World Economic Forum, or one of the heads anyway, we understand that they have penetrated our governments, and they have molded for decades at all levels.
At all levels, municipal included, provincial, federal, it's at all levels.
Well, I can tell you, I live in a tiny little village east of Calgary, an hour east of Calgary, in Standard, less than 400 people. My husband's on the town council now, and we can see ICLEI involved in what is being disseminated. We can see how the Municipal Government Act through the who are they? Well, through the administrative appointees, they are disseminated information. People work behind the scenes to bring these bylaws, etc., to council. The people sitting as the council, elected council members, may not have the expertise or the knowledge. Framing why certain things are happening, the talking points are given, and then we have this is how these bylaws and this creep of the UN agenda gets into even the smallest municipality, like the Village of Standard, for instance, right? Where they had as part of...
And the senior administration that have been there for 10, 15, 20 years, that their role is to continue, these goals, this agenda.
Well, and it's very clear how they want to manage it, because I forget what it's eluding me right now. The position it's like the executive director. It's not the executive director, but the person, the CAO. So yes, the CAO. There's a culture within these municipalities that the CAO has a definitive function under the Municipal Government Act, but city councillors who are responsible for implementing the budget and steering the municipality into the direction that the citizens want the municipality to go, they are very clearly delineated, and the CAO often reminds the town or city councillors to stay in their own lane, right? And I mean, that's a whole different thing over there, but we can see that even in this little town of Standard, Village of Standard, that there was language about we're going to be a net zero community. And when we drilled down to with the officials in terms of, well, what does that mean? Nobody really understood what that meant, right? And so that was one of the things that when you have informed people actively involved in their local community, were able to explain and provide a different interpretation, or a better interpretation of what these buzzwords actually mean for the long-term implications of the community. And so you're right, it's infiltrated absolutely everywhere. That's why you had, when Gondek got elected as the mayor of Calgary, not ever having uttered these words ever before in her campaign, declared a climate emergency for the city of Calgary, right? Because that has been the agenda, and that has been what has been creeping in. And so these people get this power. They realize that the power of recall and the general apathy of the community is going to be on their side, and these policies that are bureaucratically driven are going to find their way being pushed through regardless of what the will of the greater population want, right? And so there's this time frame of absolute destruction that occurs by the implementation of all of these rules, bylaws, licenses, all the rest of this crap, right? And so, and it's all born out of this idea that we have to promote sustainable development, right? I mean, look, I believe in being a good steward of the environment, but I'm also of the opinion that we need to look at multidisciplinary approaches for all of these things, and all views should be considered. But there is a real crisis in our world right now when we are being silenced, we are being shadow banned, where this information is being discredited with a one-liner that you're racist, you're white supremacist, you're a conspiracy theorist, you name it, because it's designed to advance this agenda that we're going to talk about today. This one right here, this Pact for the Future, that basically all the 193 countries voted or affirmed in September of this year to accelerate Agenda 2030 and the 17 implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And again, like, you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm going to pull it up just quickly right now, where you, and I don't have you can go, if you put in sustainable development goals into any search engine, it's going to come up, and I talk about no poverty, zero hunger, quality education, good health and well-being, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy. And they go through a lot of these buzzwords that really, when you drill down to what is behind it, are really promoting a collectivist, communist type of future for us, where where the UN has agreed with the participation of the member states. So the member states, through the elected officials, so Canada became a member state of the UN through elected officials. Brian Mulroney, Conservative, okay? So that's how we got here. And so that's how they get around this idea of, or that's how they say, of course all stakeholders have been consulted, because as the elected official, you would have a duty to consult with the constituents in your country, right? And so the problem is that none of this information has been broadly disseminated, debated, or considered at the legislative or parliamentary level. And all of this stuff has happened ostensibly behind closed doors, under this guise of sustainable development. And so we have a really big problem where the transfer of information has been curated and manipulated to convince really well-meaning individuals who, of course, care about their neighbor and, of course, care about other people and want to ensure that the future generations are adequately protected. But let's look at the inconsistencies of these policies over the last 20 or 30 years, and especially in the last 10 years since they implemented and adopted the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, which, by the way, were done by Stephen Harper, another conservative advocate, right?
Yeah.
Politician.
Yeah, I know everybody wants to blame the Liberals and the government, today under Justin Trudeau. But what they fail to realize is that Stephen Harper, Brian Mulroney, these were the governments that literally laid the foundation, that when Justin Trudeau came into power, he was just able to pick up, and just run with everything. Which is a sad reality and a truth. But, for a lot of these people, because one of the messages I've been trying to convey to people is we have to stop falling in love with leaders. And for many people, like even with Stephen Harper, for all the beefs I do have with him, like he did try to make some reform changes, like in the Senate, for example, when he did get elected. And as somebody from the West and, had developed, some policies that, here we know as the firewall, and just realized, we've had a prime minister who was in the West, conservative, in Ottawa for 2 terms and could not make any change for Alberta happen, or the West happen. And that's a very powerful statement. And then it's one thing to think about he couldn't make anything happen. He still has to appease Ontario and Quebec to get reelected. You look at what he did with our equalization payments and change that formula as well to appease Quebec, to give them more money in hopes of getting a majority government a second time around. And then you have to take a step back and go, why would he, of all people, sign us up for this United Nations Agenda 2021. And language, I think, when we're talking about this, is so critically important, because these words, like you said, they oh my gosh, how can you not want to eradicate poverty? Like, are you heartless? Like, because this is what they do to conservatives, is like, you are the farthest from heartless. Oh my gosh, definitely would love to eradicate poverty. But to one of your points you just made as well, where have things gone the last 10 years? We have more poverty today. We have terrorism today. We're on the brink of World War III today. Why? Things are not getting better. They're getting worse. And why are they getting worse when we have these great ideas and these great, policies that we're supposed to be implementing, And the other thing I want to make sure that you bring up today too is the cost of this. The United Nations themselves have said this is a $7 trillion to implement this policy, these ideas.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And so, I mean, I'm really glad you have brought up that last point, because lately on social media, I've been trying to highlight this point. Okay, we're in a situation where we have increased poverty, homelessness, violence, all the rest of it. Yet we want to continue to embolden these people to try to make it better when clearly these socialist policies are failing. Like, any responsible government right now in Canada and in Alberta would be advocating to halting our membership in the United Nations and doing a robust overview and inquiry and to get an understanding about, okay, because we're in a crisis right now, I believe, constitutionally, morally, I think we are in a crisis. It's a very pivotal moment. We need to understand exactly how the UN has infiltrated Canada and the provinces, including Alberta, and we need to decide as a population whether or not we want to continue down this path of a one world government, one world economy, one world religion, which is what the government of Israel is trying to implement through.
But we have to be careful, because I did a great interview with Michael Wagner, which I haven't released yet, because he did a book. He wrote a book called Leaving God Behind. I don't know if you've read it.
Yes. Oh, I've read it, and I've promoted it a lot because it's a wonderful book.
Pre-1982, vice post-1982. You know, Canada elected a communist prime minister, and in every policy that he wrote, in all of his agenda, including the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it removed religion. So when we talk about one world religion, that one world religion is as Michael puts it, a humanistic, secular worldview.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where there is...
That's a nice way of putting it. That's a nice way of putting it.
And it's fascinating.
I have stronger language.
Because in the free world, when we talk about God, we think we're talking about a Christian God, which prior to 1982 in Canada, where we had probably the greatest freedoms and the most prosperity, of our entire lifetimes. And then after that, it just completely, continually on this downward slope and has eroded. So I found it totally fascinating to talk to Michael about that, because it truly, when you see the degradation and you can point to those connecting the dots, those pivotal moments in time and in space where, oh my goodness, that is one of those pivotal moments, was 1982, when we bought the Constitution and people thought we were better protecting our rights and freedoms. What we did, we sold our souls to the devil. We gave away our rights and our freedoms at that moment and opened them up to this secularism, this worldview. And like, you know, Michael points out, you know, every nation has a moral standard. Every nation has a religion, whether it's, and religion being worldview. It's just, which one do you choose it to be?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, it's a fascinating book, and I've promoted that book quite a bit, and I think it should be required reading for anybody who's interested to learn how the judicial system, through the case law, through Senior Pierre Trudeau, what he did by the charter, and how the charter was actually the Trojan horse to implement this idea of multiculturalism and erode the social fabric of Canada. You know, it's interesting because we have as a charter, the preamble, and a lot of people would say, you know, like we are a nation that's governed by the supremacy of God and the rule of law, yet we are not allowed to talk about what that statement means in any public school or education setting, right? Because because, you know, Christianity has basically been obliterated from all aspects of our governments and our institutions, especially our educational institutions. So how are we supposed to teach future generations what does that mean? What does that state what does that statement mean? We recognize the principles of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. It's conjunctive, right? They come together, right? And so, this is where the classical liberals lose me, because they will say to me, well, I don't really care what you do in your bedroom, right? Like, you do whatever you do in your bedroom, or whatever. Like, and I'm not talking about just this, the sexual stuff, but I'm talking about in your life, you do you, I'll do me, leave me alone. As long as you're not hurting anybody, I don't really care. And if you are hurting somebody, the law will take care of it, right? Like, it will be rooted out and we'll get justice and you'll go to jail, whatever it is the case. But the problem is that right now our legal and our judicial system have been captured by this progressive agenda, which, like, as a conservative, the whole idea behind conservatism is to conserve. And so what are we conserving? Progressives, on the other hand, they are all constantly progressing. And you can see that very plainly in how they change the definitions of words and meanings and all the rest of it on a consistent basis to meet whatever agenda they want to meet, right? And so there's a difference there. And so when you have a progressive leaning governing system, and a governing system that is embracing these idea of hate speech and discrimination and sexual orientation, and you can change your gender and all the rest of it, we're not going to be able, and this is a big part of why we have not seen justice happen with respect to the abrogation of our rights and freedoms by our governments, is because this worldview has captured and penetrated our legal system and our judges. And so they're not interested in conserving the traditional family value. They're not interested in conserving anything. They're interested in applying these new, ever-changing definitions to suit whatever it is that they want it to suit. And that's how justice is delivered. And therefore, that's why we're seeing the creep of things like the legalization of pedophilia. That's why we're seeing the lowering the age of consent. Like Danielle Smith and her parent rights legislation has lowered the age to 15. We're going to protect those who are 15, but those 16 or older are able to receive chemical castration, sterilization drugs. And what effectively she's done with that piece of legislation is legalized, codified into law, this idea that men can become women and women can become men. Okay, it's a lie. It's biologically impossible. Okay, so not only is it scientifically impossible, it's morally repugnant from my worldview, which is a Christian worldview. So she's legalized that into law, that you're allowed to do this, and she is continuing to allow sexual orientation and gender identity and these gay-straight alliances to be in our school system. Okay, so
people don't realize this, but SOGI is all embedded throughout the Alberta curriculum, and
100%. Okay, and so let's just look at this. Let's deconstruct this for a second. During COVID, when everybody was forced to wear a mask, right? And my children, who at the time were like, they're elementary school anyway, and junior high, they chose to wear a mask because they did not want to receive the ostracization by their classmates and by the teachers, right? The brainwashed teachers, right? And so at one point, my son was having headaches, and I was successful after fighting with their dad and the school to get him to not have to wear a mask, right? But and let's parlay that with what Danielle Smith solution is by letting parents opt their children out. When you let your children opt out, you are creating a adversarial environment for that child and that family vis-a-vis the institution, right? And so when my son gets opted out of his health class because they're teaching people how to give anal sex and blowjobs and all the rest of this crap in school, what they're doing is they're ostracizing him, right? And it's going to cause stress and anxiety for that child, all at the protection of confusing children more about what gender and the wrong body that they were born into, etc. Right? And you see the pride flags all in the schools. You see all of this agenda playing out, right?
Well,
And
I'll give you a similar example. My daughter is homeschooled and has been since COVID. I pulled her out. We did try, and I did get an exemption. My daughter has huge issues with putting things over her face. I, drowned when I was 12 and have never put anything over my face. I can honestly say I've never worn a mask, ever,
yeah,
not even once during COVID. It doesn't work for me. And of course, having an alternative health diploma and stuff too, I truly understood the damage that putting a dirty mask back on your face again and again and again truly does. But just to that point, you're talking about ostracizing children. My daughter at the time was grade 4, I think, 4 years? Yeah, anyway, 3 or 4. And they put her in the back of the room by herself.
yeah.
Can you imagine being this little girl, and because you don't want to wear a mask, that they were like, well, we're letting her in the classroom. They would hold her back in the locker in the hallways. She had to walk into the classroom last, had to go to the back of the room by herself. And this was a Christian school too, by the way.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean, it's so upside down, and so when you look at I had a big issue right from the very beginning in February, and all these people, including Christians, were celebrating this move by Danielle Smith, right? And really, I saw it as actually, probably a further destruction of our society, because when you by and large as a society believe in the lie that you can change your gender, I don't know where you go from there. Like, I honestly don't know how bad it's going to get insofar as that's concerned, right? And these people are being manipulated, our professionals are being manipulated. And so, I mean, as long as you, and this is the other thing that I really want to share with your audience, and what I'm really passionate about is helping people understand that it's so important to understand this idea of a worldview, or the moral compass by which we are going to agree to live in as a society, because this secular atheism that has crept into every aspect of our life is not workable, and it's a fallacy, I believe, to think that when you believe in, we all believe in something, right? And so even the atheists, even though they don't maybe not believe in a higher power, they believe in something else. They might believe in service to self. They might believe in materialism. They might believe in money. There's things that people believe in, right? And so this idea that it's only linked to religion is false, right? Even though these worldviews, these worldviews form the law making, the policy making. They form the decision making for interpretation of the law, and so it's so important that we as a society stop right now and come together to understand what it is that is really happening. And so when I saw this pact for the future, bringing it back to the UN for a little bit, and the Sustainable Development Goals, and I see the political landscape having run in the last election, and seeing, naively thinking, oh, I'll just get elected and, help change the laws, because that's really what needs to happen. We need to change laws, and we need people who understand what's happening in the legislature, in our parliament, and so that they can make really good informed decisions, educate their constituents, and advocate for what it is that their constituents want, right? And I realize
those voices are not welcome often in legislature.
They're not welcome.
You have a uniparty system where you cannot challenge the party's narrative. You know, there is no more debate. And you brought this up right at the very beginning. The need for debate, right? For critical thinking, for that opposition, to challenge the narrative, the ideas, and that's truly not welcome at all today. And on your note too about the worldview, secular atheism that we're kind of falling down on, and you know, if you've ever read the Gulag Archipelago, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, you know, the one takeaway for me in that was do not partake in the lie. So I hadn't thought about it actually the way that you just presented it from the parental rights. Is she has, you're right, she has codified. She has now in law normalized that boys are boys and boys can be girls and girls can be boys. I was looking at it from a perspective of, okay, well, we can protect at least, you know, children to the age of 16, noting where things are at. But one of the things too, Michael Wagner brought up that I think is really important is politics is really a mirror. It is just a reflection of where society is actually at and its beliefs. And this comes back to education, which you've already touched on, and the infiltration of this worldview into our academia. It started in universities, I think, but now it is truly infiltrated right down into like kindergarten and daycare. And one of the Marxist principles was the youth, you know, to get them as young as possible. You know, it was that statement, give me a child to the age of 7 and I've formed the man, you know? So yeah, really good points. I hadn't really thought about it from that standpoint, but this is what people don't understand is and it's not to the exclusion of anybody either. I mean, Canada was built up on immigration. You know, we have people here from all parts of the world that share all different kinds of ideas and different religions, but they came here for a reason. They came here because their rights were protected. They came here because of the standard of living that we were able to offer. They came here because of the tolerance and the respect, and all of that did come because I know people have been criticizing me, like, no, Nadine, where's all this Christianity coming from? And it's because we have to get back to that conversation, because if we don't, we are handing this over to these globalists without a fight. And
100%.
so many Christians choose not to get involved in politics. So many Christians choose not to get involved in these types of discussions. And you know what? That's just wrong. You are handing this over to them by doing so.
Well, and I agree with your take, what you said about do not live by lies, right? I try my best to not live by lies, and that is I'm reading Gulag Archipelago right now. I've done some other research and understanding how this happens to people, and what's really interesting is even the Christians are prepared to take half measures, right? And I'm at the point where the stakes are too high, where we can, and that's this idea of compromise and appeasing everybody on all sides. When you don't have a clear moral compass, you will basically, anything goes. Anything goes, right? And so we have a confirmed atheist running our province right now. I mean, so where is her moral compass, and where does she derive that her decision making from? That's a very important thing. And you know, I'm also a recovered alcoholic, and in the 12-step program, there's a saying called "half measures avail us nothing." And think about that. If we continue to compromise our integrity and our moral compass, our worldview, it's going to avail us nothing. We do not grow in life-affirming policies that are targeted at the actual prosperity and growth and health of our nations and our communities. And so this conversation, they want to stifle it at every single level. And but living not by lies is, I think, so important because once we buy in, by and large, to the lie, then anything is possible. From whatever the lie is, whether it's climate change, sexual orientation, gender identity, you know, you name it. And so what the UN has done is it's manufactured these crises to bring about one world government, one world religion, one world economy. And and they tug at the heartstrings of people because we, of course, don't want to leave anybody behind. Of course, we want to eradicate poverty. Of course, we want a clean environment. Of course, we want all this stuff. Of course, we want all of that. Like one of the 10 commandments is, it talks about loving thy neighbor and the golden rule. These are the things that we need to get back to understand, okay, where are we focusing our attention? And so these manufactured crises like climate change, which is predicated, the whole carbon capture thing is predicated on a lie that CO2 is a pollutant. Danielle Smith in our province supports all these carbon capture programs, which I believe
2050 net zero don't belong in the same page, same paragraph, let alone next to each other in the same sentence, in my opinion. But again, we propagate the lie. People go, why are we still having this conversation? And that's a really good point, because here we have the most senior person we have, the highest authority in our province, that is propagating this lie of net zero. And these are issues that I have too in the do not partake in the lie, because Alexander Schultz-Nissen was very clear. You cannot stop communism. You cannot stop this ideology if you partake in the lie. You have to stop.
Exactly.
Right? So you have to speak the truth. And that doesn't mean, and if you can't speak the truth, say nothing would be better than somebody in a position of authority like that to continue to, propel this idea that there's some truth behind carbon dioxide being a pollutant. And she looks at it from a perspective of, there's an opportunity there for the economy and for jobs, and why wouldn't we? And I'm like, again, there's that moral compass and compromise that we see in government so often. I mean, 1905 committee, which I've been chairing now for the last, 4 or 5 months, we are about principled government. And you know what? If we had the government was just willing to adhere to a few principles, we wouldn't need to write down a single policy. And I want to talk a little bit too, because people don't understand what the role of government is. I mean, government is here to serve the people, not the other way around. And what we've done is we've created this nanny state, this welfare state of what the government is supposed to do for us. The government wasn't supposed to do anything for us except protect our individual rights to make sure that we could have and enjoy our life, liberty, and property. And now it's become the one entity that continually violates that, and we go along with it. How we get back, Katherine, I don't know, because it's been this slow encroachment, and it's been, take away the link on the chain, the dog that has all this, freedom, and then all of a sudden one day it gets chained up, and then all of a sudden you keep shortening one link at a time, and the next thing you know, the dog doesn't resist, right? Because it's just one link at a time, and next thing you know, it can't go anywhere, can't do anything. It's the boil the frog, 1 degree at a time until the frog is dead. That's where the scenario I think we're in. And I'm thankful because people like you, people like myself, more and more people are actually talking about it. But you watch, especially on the Christian thing, so many people get so uncomfortable because you bring up religion. And it's like, you know what? For me, it's not about my faith, because I can have my faith and my religion regardless of what happens in the world. But if we want to have freedom in this country, much of that, because the one proper role of government is to protect the individual rights. So that means we need to have a strong, solid, principled judicial system.
Yeah.
The courts have to have a moral standard that applies to everybody equally, yes, but it has to have a view of what that is. And I mean, I've just watched what's happened pre-1982 and post-1982, and it hasn't been to the benefit of the people. It's been to the benefit of the people in power, and we've watched our freedoms erode. So, let's get back to the United Nations and how all of this is kind of trickled down, because, this is a group of unelected individuals who come together, just like the World Economic Forum, come together, and worse yet, it is a redistribution of wealth. They are taking, we are funding this nonsense.
Yeah.
You know, and
we're funding it, and it's under the guise of collectivism, which is communism. It's under the guise of inclusivity. It's under the guise of equity, which is equality, equal outcome rather than equal opportunity, which are fundamentally different worldviews. When you expect everybody to have the same thing, that is communism, right? Whereas equal opportunity recognizes that, you know what, we are all human beings. Yes, we are all creatures of God. We are not all equal. We all bring different things to the table. Men and women are different. We have different roles, and those should be celebrated. And you know what the feminist movement did was it completely confused women, I believe, to believe that they need to become more like men. I mean, which has had I'm a divorce lawyer. It has had a tremendous impact to the breakdown of the traditional family, increases in divorces, increase in domestic violence. That in and of itself has contributed so much under the guise of equality, when we should be celebrating our differences and our strengths as individuals that help to create a whole intact family unit that stays together and works together, which then gets expanded throughout to the community, right? And so we have these policies that have been in place and they come into force through our governments and through our parliament. And so, I really encourage people to look at this document, Pact for the Future, which talks. It basically says we recognize that we have an increased poverty. Everything is going to shit, apparently, and which we can see actually in real time around us with the level of homelessness, drug addiction, cost of living, all the rest of that. We can see that happening, but they think the problem is climate change, right? And they think the problem is women and girls aren't equal enough. But you contrast with that, they have a commitment to have an equal society where women and girls feel safe and protected and blah, blah, blah. Yet they're also promoting the agenda that men can become women and invade women's only spaces, like our restrooms and change rooms and clubs and sports, right? And so they're contradicting what it is that they're actually say in black and white in this document what they want to achieve. Their whole goal is to
men and women are equal too, because men have been drafted for war. So if men and women are 100% completely equal now, then what's to say that we don't start drafting our 16-year-old girls to go to war?
Yeah.
And these are some of the fears that I have when I read stuff like this, because people don't stop to think about this. And I grew up. I was born 1972, a little bit earlier than you. And I was born, and I was raised I was a tomboy. Oh boy, was I ever a tomboy. I hunted, I fished, I put the garden in with my dad every year. I was my dad's boy. And I am very much, probably more masculine than most, women, definitely. But I am definitely a woman. There is no doubt about that. But if I had grown up in today's environment, I'm sure they would have convinced me that I was a boy and I should be transitioning, which scares the crap out of me because, womanhood is so amazing. And you see these women just throw it away at the age of 12, 14. They don't know. Like, you have no idea even who at 27, I was just starting to get a grip on who I was as a person.
I was like 45.
And it changes, right? It changes, it's like a snake who sheds its skin. There's different stages of development, and there's going to be times in your life when things are confusing, and they're supposed to be, right? That's when you're supposed to put on that critical thinking, and things are supposed to get a little difficult, and you challenge ideas even about yourself. So it is scary when you think that at the age of 16 we're going to allow these children to make decisions that will impact them for the rest of their lives, some of them completely irreversible. And
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking, as you know, and I've been very outspoken, especially about women in sports. I mean, I was the female athlete in my school year over year, junior high and high school. And I'll tell you, I practiced with the boys. And the boys were always so good to me because no one ever, nailed the ball at me. No one ever,
Yeah.
because they could, but they didn't, right? There was a respect there. And even in co-ed sports, when we played co-ed teams, the boys were always, they'd pick on the boys, right? Not pick on the girls. But now
Yeah.
when you've got these trans athletes that are coming in, they're men, they're boys, and I'm not even going to say boys, they're men, 16-year-old, these are young men. Biologically, like, I could not compete. I mean, I was the best female athlete, and I could not compete with even the
Of
middle
course not.
of boys.
Well, I mean, I don't even know why we have to even have this conversation, to be honest. Like, I agree with you, Nadine. Like, this is ridiculous. And I mean, we are not the same. I am very different than my husband, and very different than my son, and very different than my father. But we can coexist, and we can build on our strengths of what we are, what we bring to the table as different sexes, and there's nothing wrong with that.
We do boy things or we do girl things doesn't make us a boy. Like, I hunt, put a gun in my hand, I know exactly what to do with it, whether it's a handgun or a rifle, but that doesn't make me a boy. But this is my fear with these things like this United Nations, when they're calling for equality, right? They're calling for
You're calling
everyone
equity,
right? Well, you have to be
yeah,
careful. I mean, because they're calling for equal outcome, right?
yeah,
So there is no
yeah,
differentiation, right? It's everybody is the same. So every sex
yeah,
is
yeah.
the same, every gender is the same, So if the
Social
World War III
class,
breaks out tomorrow,
everything.
it's like, hey, we're calling everybody forward because you're all the same. Everybody's equal. There's no differentiation.
Yeah, exactly. And so the key takeaway from this paper, though, and from these resolutions, is that they want to accelerate it, right? They recognize that their policies are failing. We're seeing it in real time. I don't know why we as a society, a nation, a province would want to entrust these maniacal psychopaths any further by implementing any more rules and regulations, etc. And I want to draw to everybody's attention, when you do look at this document, and maybe Nadine, you can put it into the link. Annexed to this document is what's called the Global Digital Compact, right? And it's I know it's hard to see, right? So anyway. This is, and so this is important because what we're seeing happening at the federal level through Bill C-293, the Pandemic Preparedness Act, through the Online Harms Act, through Bill C-4, which talks about criminalizing individuals, making it a criminal offense to not affirm your child, for instance, right? Having these laws that are being put into place that are going unnoticed by and large by mainstream, because the mainstream media is in bed with these globalist progressive crazy people. So and they're not disseminating this information, they're not thinking about things clearly and critically. So one of their goals is, like, our goal is an inclusive, open, sustainable, fair, safe, and secure digital for all, excluding the military domain, right? Which I found was kind of interesting. And it's their goal is to accelerate progress across the sustainable development goals, and that's on all levels, whether it's economic, whether it's environment, especially the environment. They really want to ramp up all the policies and make sure that they are going to meet their made up targets of no more of an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, right?
Well, they have actually said in this document that climate change is critical to this document. Yeah. And this is what they're doing to use to control the population, right? To create the fear, to create these catastrophic crises, apparently, we have to avoid. So climate change is like a cog in the wheel to this. It is one of their critical pieces of the puzzle that without this, they know it falls apart.
Yeah. Oh, 100%, right? But that's the design of this, is to create these manufactured crises, whether it's economic or instability, inflation. They've used COVID was a manufactured crisis that involved the cooperation of all governments through the UN. I mean, the World Economic website has like a lot of information dedicated to COVID-19 and what happened, and so they manufacture these crises like climate change, COVID-19, all this kind of stuff, to usher in what they want, which is to crash the current system, and then rebuild or have a system in place which is digitally monitored, right? And so this part of it is on hyper overdrive right now in Canada, and we can see it with the Online Harms Act, which is going to be absolutely detrimental to free speech. And by changing the hate speech definition to make it even more arbitrary and elusive than it ought to be, we are going to have a situation where the Ministry of Online Harms, or the bureaucratic committee that is going to be staffed by progressive left-leaning individuals, are going to decide what is an online harm, how hateful you are, whether or not you need to have a fine levied against you for a complaint that was made and you're not able to meet your accuser. And it's all designed, be very clear. Where is this here? It's all designed, where I had it, to target misinformation, disinformation, and they recognize, the UN and the member states recognize, that they need to have government intervention in place to ensure that society is protected from hate, discrimination, misinformation, disinformation. And this is what is coming through these pieces of legislation that impact all of us. And I was really happy to see the Smith government come out and make an announcement about Bill C-293 and the complete encroachment into provincial jurisdiction.
But yet at the same time, RJ came out with a great announcement on C-293 talking about, but here we're a little late to the game. Like, this conversation should have been started 2 years ago when this was announced, and it should have been fought tooth and nail. And here we are now when it's, basically approved. And we're just now entering the conversation. But then contradicting that as well, when, just a couple of weeks ago, they made this grand announcement about their anti-hate speech line in Edmonton.
Oh, yeah, I know. They're all in on it. They're all in on it. I mean, and you know what? And sometimes I don't even think that they realize what they're in on, right? I don't think that these, by and large, a lot of these people are maniacal, like have like the agenda to destroy things. I think that they really believe, to a large extent, that what they're doing is for the good of everybody. But then this goes back to our conversation earlier, which is the conversation. The conversation is about, what kind of society do we want? What worldview are we going to adopt? Are we all in agreement with that? And if we're not, what are we going to do about it? So Albertans, this is the most freedom-oriented province in Canada, so they say, and notwithstanding that we have a socialist government under the auspices of conservative to boot, which drives me crazy because there's nothing conservative about this government whatsoever. Well, they're not conserving anything from my perspective, and so.
And the fun thing with that, Katherine, I've been asking people, where are all the liberals in this province? Like, there are liberals. I mean, they vote liberal federally, and there are liberals in this province. You know what they call themselves? I mean, there are some that are not fiscally conservative, and then not, and all about social programs. Those are the NDP, right? They're just like government, bigger government, more spending, all about me. But what about those fiscally conservative, progressively social? right? The PCs, the red Tories.
No. Yeah.
They're in the UCP. This is part of the problem. We do not have a conservative party.
Well, that's why we need a conservative party. That's why we need it.
It is what Pierre Elliott Trudeau did. As a communist, knew he would never get elected. He infiltrated the Liberal Party, which was slightly progressive, and under the guise of sharing all these social welfare programs, convincing people like the Canada Pension Plan, right, that life would be better, and social health care. You know, he was the one who introduced all of these ideas and implemented them. And people, you know, took thinking that there was a free lunch. There's something in it for them that they can get at no cost. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Let me tell you, there is no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah. Well, and what I really want to see, you know, like, I want the conservative, I want the conservative voice back in politics, the actual conservative voice. And so that's what I'm working towards creating, by getting this information out there and waking up the people. The bifurcation of society has happened. We no longer have the luxury and ought to be confused by this idea of compromise and meeting the needs of all people. It's time for us to take a stand and defend what it is that we believe in, what kind of world that we want. And I'm not worried about your feelings. I'm sorry to say. I think being truthful and honest with you is loving. And it is what needs to happen. I mean, a child that is allowed to run amok without any discipline, they're going to be raised at, you know, they're going to turn out as a disaster, right? People need to understand the rules by which we are going to live. And this is why, you know, my podcast it's called Responsibility Quotient, because and to your point earlier about being a nanny state, you know, the government's role needs to be really pared down. We need to encourage, starting at a very young age, this notion of individual personal responsibility. It should not be up to the government to provide, I mean, I'm going to be very controversial right now, public health care. We need to reconsider that.
Public
we need
education.
To reconsider
I'll
public education. Yeah, that was my next point. The government needs to fix roads, provide basic infrastructure and security for the citizens. We've gotten so far away from that and discouraged personal responsibility to the point where, you know, during COVID, you know, people would admittedly say, I just want somebody to tell me what to do. Yeah. Well, I'm not built that way. Like, you're not built that way. I know that. A lot of Albertans are not built that way. We don't want somebody to tell us what to do. We want to have dominion over our own family and our decision making. We need a government, and we need people in government who are advocating for reduced regulations. Like, look at what the Smith government did with the transfer tax on land titles. Like, Service Alberta is the biggest money maker for the government. Why do I have to register my car every effing year?
Yeah, I know.
Why?
I understand if the ownership of the vehicle changes, but why every year? Because it generates revenue. You know what was really funny, too, because I talk about public sentiment. I did a little short, I think last week, talking about the Alberta land titles fees that are going up.
Yeah.
Increasing by 250% from $100 to $500, 330 from $150 to $500. And I'm sitting here and I'm going, like, at a time when affordability is an issue, and then people, you know what? People's argument, oh, Nadine, that is so minuscule, like it's $500. It's the lowest of anywhere else in. I went, there's the problem. The government gets away with this because you have people that make excuses for it. It's a 333% increase in fees. It takes your land transfer and a purchase of a home from like maybe $400 to over $900. Like, that is not insignificant, because this is the boil the frog 1 degree at a time. Everyone's like, oh, it's not worth it getting too involved, oh, who cares? Everybody should care. Everybody should care. And we have to stop making these excuses. The snitch line for anti-hate, that we just did.
Yeah.
People need to speak up about that. This is not a good thing, right? If somebody offends you, it's like, whatever happened to sticks and stones, may break my bones, but names will never hurt me.
Exactly.
Like, somebody pushes you, push them back, right? Walk away.
Yeah, like grow a backbone. I mean, insanity. It's I mean, so this is what we're teaching our children, right? This is what we're allowing our children to be taught. And so, but that's why it's so urgent, Nadine, because even if we woke up out of our stupor right now and changed all these things where we needed to change them, especially in our education system, we're talking about generations that is going to unwind the mess that we're in, right? And but you know what? That doesn't mean that we don't try. And every time, and I get discouraged a lot, and I want to give up a lot, but then I just realize that it's more stressful living in this world the way it is right now, and I need to push back. I need to tell people this information and be fearless about it. And that's what I want to do. That's what you want to do. And so holding, your group 1905, bringing accountability to the forefront, is what's so important. And we need to stop living not only by lies, but under fear. We need to stop it, and we need to reclaim our own personal individual power and responsibility for our own decision making. And you know what? That is a good thing, because when you look at I just to kind of go to an entirely different topic. When Portugal decriminalized their drugs, they also implemented a program to ensure that the people, the drug addicts, or people in addiction, became contributing members of society. And there's a lot of information out there about people who are contributors and have meaningful contribution to their society, to their families, are more productive, they're healthier. We don't actually offer that in our society and by our governments, right? We all want the same level of shitty healthcare because everybody else has the same level of shitty healthcare, and how dare you think that you deserve anything better than shitty healthcare?
It's called envy. It's one of the deadliest sins, envy. People say jealous. Yeah. Oh, if I'm jealous, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a great car. How did you get it? What did you do to work for it? There's a desire there to be, I really wish I had that, but I'm happy you have it. Envy is the opposite of that. Envy is you have something, I don't. You know what? And if I can't have it, then I will destroy. You must see this a lot in divorce court and marriages, because there are parents that would just rather destroy the other parent rather than just be reasonable. I mean, I've seen it through friends, 100%. Right? They just and it's envy, and it is so destructive and so deadly to not only the other person but to society, to yourself.
Well, and pride is the antithesis to humility, right? And Christians understand the concept of humility and right sizing ourselves in the grand scheme of things, right? Like to not be overly anything, right? Egoic or whatever. And but we're teaching this idea that pride, which is the ultimate deadly sin, I think, that pride is the aim and the goal, where in reality it's the opposite, which is humility, which is more, it's just a more compassionate way to live from my perspective. And so these are the ideas that we need to get back to as a society, and I want to make sure that I can do my part so that my children are protected, or at least understand the difference right now, because they're as a divorce lawyer, back to your point about seeing what I see in divorce. So I've been practicing law for over 20 years, and about 10 years ago or whatever, you would hear every once in a while somebody would come in and say, oh, I'm married to a narcissist, right? Everybody's self-diagnosing. But now, Nadine, every single person that walks through my door is telling me that they're married to a narcissist, whether it's man or woman. And I'm like, I'm not kidding you. Every single person. And I said, yeah, we've raised a society full of narcissists, which we have. It's a service to self-entitlement mentality that
well, they've
that
got the
has
perfect role model in Justin Trudeau, so
well, yeah,
everybody
but
now
that's only
fully
been
understands what a narcissist is.
and we're surrounded by them, but nobody's talking about teaching our children about, instead of how to have the best sex, or how deviant your fetishes can be, instead of going there, we're not telling people, our children, about the importance of choosing a sexual partner who shares your values, because these are the consequences to having sex, unprotected sex, etc., and the value of life and what that means, right? And so we don't have those conversations because people label it as religion, and we're not protecting the woman and pro-choice and all the rest of it. But what actually we've done is we've created a litany of policies and a culture where we're destroying families, and we're sterilizing children, and we are creating more conflict, and that's by design, because they want to usher in full control. And so the people who want to cling to the memes and the rhetoric, that's your choice. That's your choice. I mean, that's one beautiful thing about Christianity and Jesus Christ, is that you have the freedom to choose, right? But there certainly are consequences, as Justin Trudeau liked to remind us of. There are consequences to those choices, and more to the point, I just want to be in a world where we are embodying policies, and we have leadership that is not only about compassion, but it's about justice and truth, and to that point, not living by lies. And the UN is the path to destruction. And I want to see in our current governments, in whatever government next forms in this province, I want to see movements towards getting out of the United Nations. Like, we need to get this out, because and that's why I have been such a big advocate for Alberta independence, because notwithstanding the shitty deal that we have within Confederation already economically, what we see with the Laurentian elite and Ottawa intruding into provincial jurisdiction, including healthcare, dental care, housing, all the rest of that.
And Canada Healthcare Act was an invention of Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
Yeah, so we need to recognize that as long as Canada remains part of the United Nations and all subsidiary organizations, we are going to be impacted as a province by that. And so I see independence actually now being more critical than ever before, because we have an opportunity as a province to protect ourselves from this globalization. If Canada won't commit to withdraw from it, then we need to withdraw from Canada. This is actually a life-saving preservation move that has to happen, because we know that strongly worded letters and the video conferencing that Lagrange did yesterday, or whatever she did it, well-intentioned, but where's the meat now? And so the only thing, I think, the card that we need to play, that Smith needs to play, in keeping with her promise to the Alberta Prosperity Project when she was campaigning to be the leader of the UCP, was to implement not just bullshit sovereignty, like pretending that the Sovereignty Do Nothing Act is going to solve everything, which is clearly not having an impact. She needs to say that we want a referendum to leave.
Well,
and that will change,
on that note, I want to ask you.
That'll change sorry, I think that will change the trajectory of the negotiations, and
Yeah,
I
but
think
the
that will
threat has
finally
to
get us
be
moving.
real, right? And I'm going, this is the thing with Danielle is I think that they would just call her bluff on that. So, but here's the thing for you. I was so disappointed by the Alberta Prosperity Project. I was very disappointed to see them when they came out with their statement about supporting Danielle Smith wholeheartedly, without a doubt. She is the only one who can lead this province, apparently, in their one email. I was so disappointed with that. And then they follow that up with a second newsletter that talks about they are not a separatist organization. You want to talk about trying to be something, everything to someone. And I called Dennis, actually, and Dennis has agreed to come on the show and talk about that, because I'm like, WTF, you know? Seriously, Dennis, is like, this has been the entire impetus behind the Alberta Prosperity Project. This is the place where those individuals who share this ideology can come together. And that is about 25 to 30% of Albertans.
Yeah, well, and that I think that number is conservative, actually. I think that it's probably higher than that. But I agree with you, Nadine. I had the exact same, throw up in my mouth reaction when I saw those announcements. And, I commented, I think on Instagram or something. I'm like, oh, that's not what the genesis of this organization was. You and I were part of that conversation years ago, weren't we? Both of us were.
I was at the first meeting.
So, I agree. And, you're talking about Dennis Modry, and I'm super disappointed. And I kind of question, like, are they running afoul third-party advertiser stuff? Like, I don't know what's going on there. How can they, as a educational society, take this position and deviate so far from their stated original goal, which was to advocate for a referendum to leave Canada under the Clarity Act? And now that's just gone. And so, look at people will show you who they are. And now it's up to us to believe them, right? We need to believe them. And so they've decided to push Danielle Smith, and it's going to bite them in the butt. And I do not support them.
My big thing is, people have been so critical of 1905, and they're like, oh, you're trying to get rid of Danielle Smith. No, we are trying to bring back balance. When things look like this, you got a scale like this. Like, you don't get back to this by asking nicely and going, oh, pretty please, right? That does not work, especially in politics, right? So it takes tremendous amount of pressure, as you know, to kind of get things just even to here, let alone, right of center again. So, when I saw this, we have never, ever, we've asked people to support our policies. We've asked people, to bring forward their ideas, and we fight for other individual groups as well, who've had good ideas and good policies. We didn't feel we needed to do it all because there's some really great groups out there doing it. Alberta Prosperity Project was one of them. And now I sit here and I go, we've never asked anybody how they're going to vote in the leadership review. Not one. And we've never told anybody how to vote in the leadership review. And yet, we've been so condemned and attacked.
Vilified,
in many ways. And yet we've never done that. And yet here you have an organization that does, oh, you've got to support Danielle. There is no one else. I'm like, seriously, Jonathan? Like, there is no one else. You believe that BS? Like, I was just gobsmacked. And then I sat back and I went, so it's okay to support her and to be very outspoken. Now, what if this was the Jason Kenney scenario all over again?
Yeah.
The Alberta Prosperity Project came out and said, oh, no, we're strong supporters of Jason Kenney. Or, you know what? People fall in love with the leader. And it's like, I'm trying to point out the fact that leaders are going to come and go. Leaders are going to come and go. We have to have a principled government based upon a solid foundation that, regardless of who is at the helm, the government will be that principled, solid foundation that's unwavering. It's that world we talk of.
Yeah, and I'd like to know, like, what are the positions, right? Rather than, and we know, like, I've interviewed and I've been talking with long-term politicians. Randy Hillier is one of them. He confirms, as do other, Maxime Bernier, many others confirm that the actual decision makers, the policy makers, they are the corporate and other lobbyists, special interest groups that are really calling the shots, and we see that happen. And so, you know what? I just think that all of this is being exposed.
Yes.
All of this is being exposed, but now it is up to us as individuals to responsibly respond, right? And yeah, we were late to the game on many occasions, and still are, right? But we will continue to have a choice going forward. And I just encourage all of your listeners. I'm not a member of the UCP party because I've been banned from getting a membership, which I think is quite telling in terms of where things are at. I know you had struggles with when you got nominated to be the candidate to run in the last election, and they kiboshed that, notwithstanding the will of the people. So this is the kind of group that we're dealing with. This is the kind of party that we're dealing with, and it's time to actually wake up. And you know what? Whether or not you want to continue to support Danielle Smith, that's a reflection of you and where you're at. So I know where I'm at. I know where my moral compass is, and I'm going to continue to make decisions and speak in alignment with what I know to be true and what is the truth, actually. And so I just want to thank you for letting me go on like this. But it's very important. People need to understand what really is at stake here. These globalist policies are having a major transformational impact into Canadian and Alberta law. And people need to recognize that it's not just about lowering taxes. It's not just about a Canada pension plan. If they have their way, none of that is actually going to matter. It's not going to
because
matter.
it'll be a universal basic income, and there won't be any freedom of speech. It'll be, this is the narrative, and this is the home that you're being assigned, and it'll be a 15-minute city where, sorry, you'll take public transit because you're not high enough on the Richter scale here to actually own a car. And if so, put it in your application, just like it was in communist China and
the carbon capture infrastructure that Danielle Smith is helping to build, will parlay into the social credit system, right? This is what people don't understand. These are the dots that people are not connecting. Brett Wilson likes the economics of net zero. Well, of course he likes the economics of net zero because he's benefiting from it. Like, they like the path to net zero because they're all in on it together. They're creating a made-up commodity based on a lie. And so this is what we need to really start thinking about. And that's where I want to see the conversation go, because these other things, while they are important on a day-to-day level, and but in the grand scheme of things, the head of the snake is not lower taxes. The head of the snake are these globalist ambitious institutions, NGOs, governments, and non-government and corporations that are driving the agenda. And we need to wake up to this reality, and we need to protect ourselves.
Yeah, I've been accused of working for them. I'm WEF, apparently, according to the critics, of 1905. And I mean, as you know, it couldn't be further from the truth. But the reality is, I question their motives when people make statements and claims like that, because it's like, you're protecting a globalist, you're protecting this net zero, you're protecting the, and then, people say that, we haven't been effective and we've been very critical. But the thing is, I don't believe that we would have seen Danielle Smith even talk about things like an Alberta Bill of Rights, which, is a whole other conversation in of itself as to whether or not I think that can have any effect. But
let's look at it vis-a-vis the worldview and what's stacked in our legal and judicial system. You tell me whether or not it's going to matter at the end of the day whether the courts are going to uphold your right to bodily autonomy. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not going to bank on it. Like, let's see
Well, we saw with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that didn't uphold it, and that's, embodied in the Supreme Law of Canada. So, I think Alberta, on the Alberta Bill of Rights, better to have it than not. The one area I thought, Catherine, and let's throw this out there before we say goodbye, I thought was really interesting is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms does not protect property. Right? There is really no property rights in the Charter. And I thought this would be a very interesting legal challenge, obviously, that the federal government would have to bring on the province if Danielle was smart. And I don't think she's going to do this, because she's already said she wants to draft the language in such a way that it won't be challenged. And I'm going, that's the exact opposite that you want to do. You want to draft language that is going to be challenged. What if Alberta put such strong language and such strong protection around property rights? Because that's not only land, that is gun rights, that is your bodily autonomy. Put such strong language around it, because it is not included in the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I thought, that would make for a very interesting case. What do you think?
Well, I think certainly we need to strengthen property rights. I think that it would make for an interesting case, although I wouldn't trust it to go to the Supreme Court of Canada, that's for sure. What we have to remember is that the Alberta Bill of Rights is designed to address Alberta law, right? And the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is there to protect federally mandated organizations and laws, right? So there is a distinction there. The Alberta Bill of Rights, while I agree with you, it might be nice to have this language in there just to show, the people are turning their minds to it. But at the end of the day, if you don't change legislation, all the legislation, because the Bill of Rights is and it was still at the time of COVID as well, the Bill of Rights is supposed to be the framework that underpins all other laws, right? And so when you have a law that is abridging those protections that are God-given, not from the government, that are God-given and they're supposed to be protected through the government, through these pieces of legislation, when you need to have all the legislation reviewed and bolstered in order to reflect the intention of what that means in the Bill of Rights. So it's a one step of a very long and arduous process, but I don't actually think that process can be effectively undertaken because, one, there's been no review of COVID. There's been no actual review and accountability regarding COVID. And we're at a situation where we can't even decide what worldview we're going to be governed by. So it's going to make the interpretation of these rights very precarious. And then you throw in other things like UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights. So for the life of me, I don't know why we are doing land acknowledgements. I don't understand what the purpose of that is. I know that the UN has, through their various organizations and resolutions, including UNDRIP, and in this document too that we've been talking about today, that there is a commitment to restore to the Indigenous certain things, and that includes property. That's a big thing, and in fact, in BC, that's already happened ostensibly, and so. These people, like I was walking down in my little village of 400 people, and there's a group of people that erected a land acknowledgement thing right on a big pedestrian pathway. And I was like, how the hell did this get here? And so we need to have a conversation about that, and we need to understand what this language means. Like, why is it that my children are reciting a land acknowledgement at school assemblies, but we can't say the Lord's Prayer? Like, all of this needs to get out of our education system, but our government, including the Smith government, is perpetuating it and endorsing it, and so things will not get better. They're going to continue to get worse if we don't act now, and if we don't recognize really what it is that we're facing, and we don't take bold action to make sure that we are going to protect ourselves. And that involves people like you and me continuing to be out there and saying what it is that we need to say, and for other people to support people who have actually demonstrated through their actions that they can be trusted and that they are who they say they are. right? And I think that's very important. And ultimately, when people vote, that you're voting for people who actually share your values. And if you don't know what those values are for yourself individually, then spend some time trying to figure that out. And what does that mean, right? Because it's really important. The legacy that we leave our children should not be handed off to the government, to any third party to decide. It's up to us as responsible individuals. And when we have a strong understanding of who we are as individuals, then we pass that on to our families and on to our local communities. And that's how meaningful change is made, not through push down regulations and bankrupting all of Canadians so that, we can fight a fictitious climate change dystopia and this idea that women can become men and men can become women. We have to stop. Let's stop living by lies and let's do the right thing.
Wonderful. I think that's a perfect place to stop because I don't think you can say it any better than that.
Well, thank you for having me today, and I'm looking forward to Monday.
Wonderful. Now, where can people find you, Katherine? That's one thing we will make sure that, anybody listening to this, where can they go find more about you, more about what your initiatives have been? You do have your own podcast.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Katherine Kowalchuk 9. I'm not really on Facebook anymore because of the censorship. You can go to katherinekowalchuk.com, and all of my previous podcasts are on there. I've been taking a little bit of a hiatus from the podcast world just because I'm dealing, my family situation with my children has changed, so which has led me to be both in Calgary and Standard, more so Calgary. I've taken a focus, and so anyway, something had to give, and my family comes first. So that's what gave for right now. But I'm really, if you want to reach out to me, you can reach me through my website, katherinekowalchuk.com. And thank you very much for letting me letting me share this information with everybody.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. It's always so much fun chatting with you. We really do need to do this more often, though, because this is just like scratching the hen scratch, at the very, very top of the surface of so many of the deeper issues.
Well, maybe you and I'm going to throw this out there for you to think about. Let's create a summit. Let's talk about this. Maybe it's called the Moral and Ethics Summit or something. Let's advance this conversation and I think we need to have input from multiple disciplines, multiple different people as well. But we need to have this conversation because I think we're in a moral crisis right now.
That's a really great idea. I love that, actually. And a few people just came to my mind very quickly as soon as you said that, an ethics and moral summit. Because, like you said, if we don't have the foundation, we don't have the principles, we can all sit and go around in circles and circles and circles day over day about policies. But if, those policies are not grounded in something that, can't be changed at the whim of a government or an individual, they're meaningless to even debate. And I think that's what a lot of these globalists want us to do. I think it's distraction. They try to keep us on events and activities and things that truly, make people feel good, like an Alberta Bill of Rights, make people feel good, give them a false sense of security. Again, not trying to bash the hard work of good people, because I think there was really good intentions behind that. But I don't necessarily, I'm not confident we're going to see the Danielle Smith version of what was submitted even live up to the original text that was originally put on her desk. So let's talk about that. Let's do that. I love that idea. Let's do a summit. And, Monday, October 28th here, Red Deer, we're going to hear more from Katherine and some friends, on the legal challenges and things that we're seeing from this government and others, things that hopefully, again, that's in and of itself, which is something that so many people don't think about. They had the Injection of Truth event, which brought up so many great things on the medical side, but you can't separate the medical from the legal, unfortunately. I think we have to understand the limitations that are being placed on the lawyers that are even trying to make changes happen, and the challenges that you guys are up against, because as Michael Wagner pointed out, it's, the Parliament freely gave the power to the courts. They did not want to do this. This was a parliamentary decision, through Trudeau and the Constitution to give up that power, and they did it knowingly. And now so many politicians just want to go, oh, wash my hands of it. There's nothing I can do. How many times we've heard Danielle say that? There's nothing I can do. Well, I'd like to know in this province, maybe this is a good question for Monday, who in this province has more power than our highest elected official, the Premier?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to know, actually. I would like to know that because somebody's clipped her wings. She's already told us that. I'd like to know who that is.
I would love to know. I'm like name organizations, Danielle. I would love to know that, because I'm sure you and I together could have a real field day with putting a target on that person's back.
Yeah. All right. Well, to be continued.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time this morning and for such a wonderful debate, not even debate, discussion. And we will plan to do this again.
Thanks, Nadine.